Hey everyone, so today we're going to dive into Illustrator. I have no idea which of you have played with this program before and which of you haven't, so we're going to go over some of the very basic parts of it today just to get you comfortable with it. Once you have downloaded the software, you're going to want to open it up. There's a couple different ways you can do that. You can go up to your Spotlight and type in Illustrator, and it should come up there. You would click there. You can go into your Finder, which is the little blue and white guy there. Let me open a window here. And you'd go to Applications. It should be right up the top in orange. You probably will not have CC19 on yours. I had to install the updated version of that, so you would double click from there. And after you've done one of those things, you can add it to your dock just to make it all that much easier. When you open it up, you get to a screen that looks like this. Yours will be blank because you haven't made anything yet. We have to create something new. So once you hit that Create New button over there on the left, you have a couple different options. For right now, you don't need to worry about bleed or color mode or raster effects. Those are all a little more advanced settings than you need to be thinking about right now. What you need to worry about is the name of it, because if you have a bunch of untitled files, it's going to get really hard to find stuff as you continue through the course and save stuff. The other thing you need to think about is how big you want your image to be. You can choose increments from pixels to points to picas to inches to feet in inches to yards to millimeters to centimeters and meters. Really big for signs and stuff. For the most part, I'll either tell you pixels or inches. To give you an idea, a typical piece of computer paper is 8.5 inches wide and 11 inches long. The buttons over here tell me what orientation I want the paper to be. If it's portrait, it's up and down. If it's landscape, it's side to side. And notice when I click between those two buttons, it swaps my numbers around so that they fit the correct dimensions. So I'm going to go ahead, leave those other settings alone, and I'm going to hit Create. That takes me to my workspace. Your workspace is a wonderful place where all sorts of magical things happen. So we've talked a little bit in the past. If you played with Sketch.io in elementary with me, we talked about layers. We'll hit on those today. But right now we're going to talk about the most basic of tools you have. This is your black arrow, your selection tool, and it just allows you to move and scale things. The shape tools are going to be your best friends in this course. They're very important. And we're going to talk a little bit about fill versus stroke. Fill is your solid square down here. Notice when I mouse over it, it says fill. That's just the color of your object. If you double click on it, it takes you to a window like this that lets you choose what color you want it to be. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. But before I do that, you'll notice there are some numbers down here that change depending on where I move this selection circle. That is the hex code of the color. If you're ever trying to match a shade exactly to what you did before, there's tools for that, but say you're working in a different document and you can't get it to work. Each of these different pixels of color has its own code. It's very important for web developers to use hex codes because if you think about it, people's computer settings for their light and etc. are not always the same. So you want to be consistently using the same hex code. So if I go to my rectangle tool and I click and drag, just like so, that makes me a lovely, lovely rectangle that's blue. It has a black border or stroke. That's where we come into here. Your button over here next to your fill with the little cutout of the square in it, that's your stroke or your outline. You can either change it to something else entirely. We'll do a nice bright magenta. And now that's got a brighter border around it. Say I don't want a stroke at all, though. There's a couple different states your fill or your stroke could be in. There's solid, there's gradient, and there's none. Watch what happens to my square's border when I hit none. It goes away, or it should if I've selected it. That's what this arrow is about, the selection tool. So once it's selected, you'll see those boxes pop up around it. If your stroke is in front and you hit none, it takes your border away. So that is stroke, fill, and your selection tool. Your selection tool allows you to move it, change the size of it, change the proportions of it. If you hold shift while you're dragging on these sort of things, it will preserve the proportions. Like say you don't want to make your rectangle all squishy. That's important. The other selection tool you have is your indirect selection tool. This area around my rectangle is called a path. It's not just the border, it's not just the stroke, it's the number of lines that is telling the computer, hey, this is a rectangle, this is what the shape is. We can edit the path by using the direct selection tool. That's the white arrow. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And this is how you're going to get some of the more complex shapes to build your critters and your cartoons in this particular class. If I double click, that shows me the anchor points of my path. I can change how rounded my circle is by dragging those in or out. And I can do a whole bunch of different things with that. We'll talk more about how you can edit the path and add anchor points with the pen tool in another video. That's what that button does. Other things you need to understand include the fact that tools like to hide behind each other. If I mouse over right now, the rectangle tool, and click and hold, I've got a whole mess of other tools hiding underneath here. So I'm going to go I'm going to change my color, and I'm going to make a circle. I can click and drag, or if you have specific measurements, now it's made them both that because they were both selected. If you have specific measurements that you want to create a shape with, you can also do this. Let me change that because that was bothering me. Say I want a circle that's 4 inches in diameter. Instead of clicking and dragging, all I have to do is click and we'll just type in width 4, height. I want it to be perfectly circular, so 4. And that gives me a nice, round, even circle. Just like so. So those are your very basic shape tools with your selection tool, your direct selection tool, your fill, your stroke, and your shape tool.